Hey, hey. Hope all is well with you. Hope you're writing like mad. Hope you're having a good time and enjoying it. So, I'm just really working through the book because it's got so much in there. And of course, I hope you're about done reading the book. It's a very quick read, it's very instructive. There's some really great stuff throughout, but we're going to be dealing with chapter 6, which is loaded with some really, I think, some very insightful things dealing with the process of script writing. And the chapter is called The Immutable Laws of Screenplay Physics. Just some things that you do and you don't do. All right. So, again, the reason that this is called Save the Cat, his idea is, and if you watch enough stuff, you'll be able to see this moment. All right, where the protagonist has to have this moment where they quote unquote save the cat. They do something that is really very endearing to us in some way as an audience. We're very much curious about them. We want to follow them in their journey, their struggles, whatever it is. They have to have that really early on. It makes us want them to win. Okay. And it's funny because I was watching this show. It's a British detective show, and he's a private detective. And one of the cases that he's working on is he's trying to find this old lady's cat. And I just thought, this is so brilliant because his save the cat moment is trying to save a cat. It's so perfect. And so you'll find that in stories, and you've got to present it in there early on somewhere. Just keep that in mind. So he mentions that in chapter 6, but there's some really fun stuff in here that I want to mention as well. And he gives them cute little nicknames, but we can call it whatever we want. The first one I want to look at is the Pope in the Pool. The Pope in the Pool is the problem of introducing your world in exposition without it being too boring. So he talks about this story. He's talking about a screenplay that was written called The Plot to Kill the Pope. And the opening sequence is dealing with all the background information, exposition, which is just boring, okay, in the story. So you have to be very creative. Well, their solution was put the Pope in the Vatican swimming pool and have him be swimming back and forth while all of this is going on. It's just an interesting way of presenting your narrative information, your narration, your exposition in the beginning. You pick some form of action where it can come out in a very creative way. He mentioned some other places as well in there. I think he mentions Pirates of the Caribbean, Clear and Present Danger, some other movies in there. But pay attention to that. You've got to be careful about exposition. It is so difficult to keep an audience interested unless you've got it coupled with something interesting that is expressing something about the character. So the Pope in the Pool is very interesting because who knew the Pope had a pool, right? And he swims. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. There's a difficulty in trying to pack too much into your story where it starts getting into the realm of just being goofy and silly, and you can't really take it seriously. He calls this double mumbo jumbo. I think you're just trying to put too much into a story, and you need to decide what the story is really about. So his wonderful version of this is that he says, in quote, you cannot see aliens from outer space land in a UFO and then be bitten by a vampire, and we now have both aliens and undead. You just can't do that. And that's very true. It's very, very true. And we still see movies that try to do that. Now, he's very critical of Spider-Man, the very first one with Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe. And he thinks that's double mumbo jumbo because not only are we asking the audience to believe that this boy was bitten by a radioactive spider at the very same time across town in the same town, we've got this horrible radioactive chemical reaction gone wrong, and we create the Green Goblin. And this is all at the same time. He says that's really pushing it, and you're packing too much in. Well, that happens in superhero movies all the time, and they get away with it. But just be careful trying to pack in too much for an audience to really go along with, okay? Even though you may be thinking, well, this is really frosty cool, I love this. Audiences, you have to streamline your story, okay? You just do. One of my big pet peeves, and this is hard, this is really hard, and a lot of you are interested in fantasy or science fiction. He calls it laying pipe. And I've heard this expression for years and years. I think before I even read this book. But laying pipe is where you have to spend so much time explaining the world that we are watching. Okay? This is very tough with speculative science fiction, speculative literature, anything fantasy, hardcore science fiction, because you want to explain how this universe works, and it's very boring. So you're laying all this pipe. And laying pipe involves a lot of terminology and names and words and slang terms and all of this that very often takes so long to explain. Perfect example, and I kind of like the movie, but he's exactly right. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Spielberg movie called Minority Report, and it's based on a Philip K. Dick story. And Philip K. Dick, if you don't know, very famous science fiction writer. In fact, and he's been dead quite a while, but his work is mined all the time by Hollywood. Blade Runner, that's probably the most famous example, but there have been several movies made based on his stories and novels. So Minority Report is a very complicated setup that takes a long time. Now, Snyder timed it out as 40 minutes. And if you watch it, it's a very long sequence in the beginning to explain how this world works. And it's laying so much pipe and so much on the audience, it's really hard to keep going. And unless you're kind of a hardcore science fiction fan, you're going to turn it off. So if you've got this realm or this world that's very unique, maybe you've got this unique business where your world is taking place, or it's another planet, or it is a special field or study, you can really get caught up in laying way too much pipe. So you've got to be very careful with that. Okay, putting in too much stuff is just a problem. It just is. Audiences, it's hard to maintain attention. Now he has this, and this is done, as all of these are done, unfortunately, but he's pointing out that it's really not good storytelling. He points out that we can do some character things that are way too much, and it pushes the realm of believability. And he bases it off of a sketch that he saw on Saturday Night Live years and years ago called The Black Vet. And it was about a new show about an African-American veterinarian who was also former military. So he's a vet who's a vet, okay? And it's just, I mean, it's ridiculous. But that kind of thing happens all the time. So he said that he had a story that he was working on called Lefty. And it was about a boxer who's also a communist, which is on the left of the political spectrum, okay, who was also left-handed. I mean, okay, that's just ridiculous. It's too much. It's too much. You cannot put that in there. It just gets into the realm of the silly, all right? Unless you're writing something that's a parody or silliness. Whoo, be careful of that, all right? Be careful of that. A vet who's also a vet. I love that. It's so good. That's so classic, right? Um, Other problems, all right? Other problems is moving the story too slowly. And he calls it watch out for that glacier moment, all right? When you involve the bad guys, the antagonistic moment into your story, and they're off somewhere in the world, they're not on screen yet, sometimes them closing in takes a long, long, long time. And it feels like an eternity. It just feels like you're moving so incredibly slow. All right. He mentions Dante's Peak. He also mentions Open Range. I've seen both of those. He's exactly right. He is exactly right. How it moves so painfully slow. I remember watching Open Range with my friends, and it's like nothing's happening. They're just talking. I mean, there's just a lot of talk about being a cowboy, and that's it. I mean, what is going on is so painfully slow. So you have to get us there. You have to get us to the bad guys, whatever the bad guys happen to be. All right. If it's the person versus themselves, you still got to get to that moment. And you don't want to rush through it, but you don't want it to be painfully slow. All right. To get there. Now, he talks about the character arc. I mean, we use this term all the time. I don't know where it came from. Maybe he mentions in there where it came from, but it's an arc. We think of a character moving in this direction, all right? And I've given you a lot of outlines to look at. Vonnegut's Shape of Stories, The Hero's Journey by Campbell, the Beat Sheet. There's so many different ways of looking at this. But here's the thing. Your protagonist cannot be the same person on the last page that they are on the first page. There are several actors that talk about this, that they pick scripts based on the change. And if there is no change, there's no growth, there's no altering how the character views the universe and works in the universe, they're really not interested because they view it as being a very static character, not dynamic. And so you have to really keep that in mind as well. Every character that you really love and enjoy is totally different that last scene than they were in the first scene. That's good writing. So keep that in mind. How are you going to make them change? Because stories are all about change. They're all about change. That catalyst moment changes our normal world. It changes our normal universe. And so it can't be the same. We can't go back to the way it was on page one. That's not good storytelling. It's not really paying attention to that character arc. Okay. There are several other things in there that you can read. He talks about his work with Spielberg and some ideas that Spielberg had about screenwriting. Spielberg just doesn't feel like bringing in the media is a good plot point to use. So that's something to chew on. Read that part. 6 is a great chapter. It's just a great, they're all great chapters, but that one really gives you some hints about how do you get this stuff out. Your exposition is going to be problematic if you don't couple it with something interesting that's going along. Otherwise, you might as well just have the character sit and break the fourth wall and just stare out and say, okay, here's what's going on and here's my life and here's what's happening. And a lot of playwrights do that, which is considered to be really poor writing choice. Or please don't do this. If you've done it, I'm begging you, go back and change it. Don't start with a voiceover. And I know some of you have done that. And some movies do it and they get away with it. But I'm going to tell you, industry standard for any medium is that it's really kind of lame way to start a story. So don't do it. Push yourself not to do that, where you start with a voiceover explaining the world or having some mystical quote or whatever. Oh, don't. Okay. Stories are about change and they're about action. That doesn't mean it's about explosions. It means that things are happening, that we're not talking about things happening or how we feel about all that stuff, but we're showing it, we're demonstrating it. Okay? So think about that. Also, did you try the note cards? I found a 3x5. I think it's the only one I have in the house. Try the note cards. It's great to try to index card your story that way because you can really organize it that way. I've done it in class. I think it's a great thing. It's a great tool. So use it, do it. And I think you will find that once you get your ideas organized, the writing of it really becomes that much easier to do. So I told you from the very first week, I'm about structure. Structure this thing out and then build it. Okay? All right. So I look forward to all your assignments that are due this week, and keep writing and take care.